Rain hammered the metal skybridge like 1,000 angry fists, drowning out the city noise below. Amina Kwan didn't hear her own footsteps anymore, only the pounding in her chest as she sprinted across the narrow walkway, breath sharp, eyes wide, heart refusing to slow down. She didn't know why she was running. Maybe instinct, maybe fear, maybe the way Drex had looked at her earlier, like he'd already decided what she owed him. Slow down, Porter girl. A voice echoed behind her. Amina froze. Drex stepped out from the shadows with two of his boys flanking him, their silhouettes tall and hungry against the flickering lights. The rain made their jackets shine like wet armor. Amina's fingers curled around the strap of her bag, knuckles white. "I don't want trouble," she said, voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. Drex laughed, low and amused. "Trouble? You think you're important enough to cause trouble?" One of his boys stepped closer, blocking her path. The other moved behind her, cutting off escape. Amina's pulse spiked. She tried to step back, but her heel hit the railing. Cold metal. No way out. "Let me pass," she whispered. Drex tilted his head. "You ignored me at the terminal today. That hurt my feelings. I was working." "You're always working," he said, stepping close enough for her to smell the cheap alcohol on his breath. "Maybe it's time you learned some manners." Amina swallowed hard. "Please don't." The boy behind her shoved her forward. She stumbled, catching herself on the railing. Pain shot up her wrist. Drex grabbed her by the collar, yanking her upright. "You think you're better than us?" he hissed. "No," she said, voice cracking. "I just want to go home." "You don't have a home," he said. "Girls like you don't get homes. You get used." Amina's breath hitched. She shoved him with all her strength. He barely moved. His boys laughed. "Feisty," Drex said. "I like feisty." He grabbed her arm and twisted. Amina cried out, knees buckling. The pain wasn't sharp. It was deep, wrong, like something tearing inside her. She tried to pull away, but the boy behind her kicked the back of her leg, sending her crashing to the ground. Her palms slapped the wet floor. Rain splashed her face. She tried to crawl, but a boot pressed down on her ankle, pinning her in place. "Stop," she gasped. "Please stop." Drex crouched beside her, gripping her chin. "You should have smiled at me today." Amina's vision blurred. She felt the pressure on her ankle increase, pain blooming like fire. She screamed, but the storm swallowed the sound. "Hold her still," Drex ordered. The boy behind her grabbed her shoulders. She struggled, twisting, kicking, clawing at the ground. Her wrist throbbed. Her ankle felt wrong, swollen, burning, maybe broken. She didn't know. She didn't care. She just needed to get away. "Let me go," she cried. Drex slapped her. Not hard enough to knock her out, just enough to silence her. "You're not going anywhere." Amina's breath came in ragged gasps. She felt the weight of their intentions, the danger closing in, the helplessness clawing at her throat. She squeezed her eyes shut. Then everything stopped. A low hum cut through the rain, a smooth, electric sound. A motorcycle engine, but not the loud, sputtering kind she heard in the terminal. This one purred like a predator. The pressure on her ankle lifted. "What the hell?" one of the boys muttered. Amina forced her eyes open. A sleek black motorcycle rolled to a stop at the far end of the bridge. A man stepped off, tall and composed, his coat fluttering in the wind. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply walked toward them with the calm certainty of someone who had never lost a fight. "Who's that?" the boy behind her whispered. Drex straightened. "Back off. This isn't your business." The man didn't answer. He kept walking, rain sliding off his coat like it refused to touch him. His eyes locked on Amina, just for a moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not pity, not concern, calculation. "Hey," Drex shouted. "I said back off." The man stopped a few feet away. "Let her go." His voice was quiet, controlled, dangerous. Drex scoffed. "Or what?" The man didn't blink. "Or you won't walk away from this bridge." The boy behind Amina laughed nervously. "Man, get out of here. You don't know who you're talking to." The stranger tilted his head slightly. "I know exactly who I'm talking to." Drex stepped forward. "You think you're tough? You think you can?" He didn't finish. The man moved so fast Amina barely saw it. One moment Drex was standing. The next he was on the ground, gasping, clutching his stomach. The boys lunged, but the stranger dispatched them with the same cold efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Amina stared, stunned, rain mixing with tears on her cheeks. The man knelt beside her. His face was unreadable, his eyes sharp and dark. He brushed a wet braid from her forehead. "You're hurt," he said softly. Amina tried to speak, but her voice broke. He lifted her gently, as if she weighed nothing. She winced as her ankle shifted. "Don't move," he murmured. Who are you?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He carried her toward the motorcycle, the city lights blurring behind them. As he placed her on the seat, she felt her consciousness slipping. Why help me?" she asked weakly. He looked at her, rain dripping from his lashes. "Because someone has to." Her vision darkened. The last thing she heard was his voice, low and steady. "Stay awake. You're safe now." Then everything went black. Before the screen fades, the narrator's voice cuts in. If you're already hooked, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because Amina's story is only beginning. Amina woke to the soft hum of something unfamiliar. Not the terminal's constant shouting, not the clatter of luggage carts, not Drex's voice echoing in her skull. This sound was gentle, steady, like a machine breathing. She blinked, vision swimming, and found herself staring at a ceiling she didn't recognize, smooth, pale, almost glowing. Her heart lurched. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her ankle, sharp enough to steal her breath. "Easy," a voice said. Amina flinched. An older woman stepped into view, her presence calm and warm like a blanket pulled over shivering shoulders. Her hair was wrapped in a deep indigo scarf, and her eyes held the kind of wisdom that made Amina's throat tighten. "You're safe," the woman said. "My name is Madam ESI." Amina swallowed. Where am I? In a place where no one can hurt you tonight." Amina's gaze darted around the room. Clean lines, soft lighting, a window overlooking a cliff where waves crashed far below. Nothing about this place made sense. "My ankle," she whispered. "Sprained. Badly. And your wrist bruised, but not broken." Madam ESI adjusted the bandage gently. "You fought hard." Amina looked away, shame burning her cheeks. "I didn't fight hard enough." "You survived," ESI said. "That is enough." Amina's breath trembled. She remembered the sky bridge, Drex's hand on her collar, the rain, the stranger's voice cutting through the storm. "Where is he?" she asked. "Who?" "The man who brought me here." Madam ESI's expression shifted, something like respect flickering in her eyes. "Jinsu is occupied." Amina frowned. "Jinsu, that is his name." Amina tried to piece together the fragments in her mind. The motorcycle, the way he moved, the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with something sharper. "Why did he help me?" she whispered. Madam ESI hesitated. "Jinsu does not tolerate cruelty. Not anymore." Amina didn't understand, but she didn't have the strength to ask more. Her body felt heavy, her eyelids drooping. She fought the pull of sleep, but it swallowed her whole. When she woke again, the room was dimmer. The ocean outside roared louder, as if the tide had risen to meet her fear. She pushed herself upright, wincing as her ankle protested. She needed answers. She needed to know where she was, who Jinsu was, and what he wanted. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. Bad idea. Pain shot up her leg, and she gasped, gripping the mattress. "Don't do that." Amina froze. Jinsu stood in the doorway, shadows clinging to him like a second skin. His coat was gone, replaced by a simple black shirt that revealed the faint outline of ink along his forearm, symbols she didn't recognize. He stepped closer, his movements controlled, deliberate. "You'll make the injury worse." Amina's pulse quickened. "I don't even know where I am." "You're safe," he said. "That's not an answer." He studied her, eyes dark and unreadable. "You're in my home." Amina's breath caught. "Why?" "Because you needed help." "That's not a reason," she said, voice cracking. "People don't just rescue strangers." Jinsu's jaw tightened. I do. Amina stared at him, searching for something human in his expression. What happened to Drex? Jinsu didn't blink. He won't hurt you again. The finality in his tone made her shiver. She didn't ask more. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. He stepped closer, kneeling so he was level with her. You're safe here, he repeated. Amina shook her head. I don't even know you. You don't need to. That's not how safety works. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, something like pain, quickly buried. You're right, he said quietly, but it's the only safety I can offer. Amina looked away, her throat tightening. I want to go home. Where is home? She hesitated. The terminal? The tiny room she rented above a noisy shop? The streets she walked alone every night? She didn't answer. Jinsu stood. Rest. Madame Si will bring food. He turned to leave. Wait, Amina said. He paused. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders shift, just slightly. Then he walked out. Amina sank back onto the bed, overwhelmed. She didn't know this man. She didn't trust him. But she wasn't afraid of him. Not the way she feared Drex. This fear was different. Sharper. More complicated. Hours passed. Madame Si brought soup. Amina ate in silence, her mind racing. She needed to think. She needed to plan. She needed. A sound cut through the house. A deep, distant boom that rattled the windows. Amina froze. What was that? Madame Si's face drained of color. Stay here. She hurried out, leaving the door half open. Amina heard footsteps. Voices. The tension in the air thickened like smoke. She pushed herself to the edge of the bed, ignoring the pain. She needed to see. She limped to the doorway and peeked out. Jinsu stood in the main hall, surrounded by men in dark clothing. One of them spoke urgently. They hit the outer gate, he said. A drone strike. Amina's heart lurched. Drone strike? Who would Jinsu's voice was low, controlled. Black Tide? Most likely. Amina's breath caught. She didn't know much about the Black Tide Syndicate, but she knew enough. Everyone did. They were the kind of people you didn't cross. The kind of people Drex bragged about knowing. The kind of people who didn't miss twice. Jinsu's gaze flicked toward her. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Get her back inside, he ordered. A guard moved toward her. No, Amina said, backing up. What's happening? You're in danger, Jinsu said. Because of you. Because of what you saw. Amina's blood ran cold. I didn't see anything. You saw enough. The guard reached her. She flinched. Don't touch her, Jinsu snapped. The guard froze. Amina stared at Jinsu. Fear and confusion twisting inside her. What do they want? Leverage, he said. And you're the easiest target. Amina's breath trembled. I don't want to be part of this. You already are. Amina felt the room tilt. Her ankle throbbed. Her wrist ached. Her heart pounded. Jinsu stepped closer, his voice softer. I won't let them take you. Amina didn't know whether to believe him. Before she could speak, another explosion shook the cliffside. Louder this time. The lights flickered. The guards tensed. Jinsu turned toward the window, eyes narrowing. They're coming back. Amina's pulse spiked. If you're still with us, make sure you like and subscribe, so you don't miss what happens next, because the danger's only getting started. Amina whispered. What do we do? Jinsu looked at her with a calm that terrified her. We survive. The second explosion shook the cliffside so violently that dust drifted from the ceiling. Amina stumbled backward, gripping the door frame as her injured ankle screamed in protest. Jinsu didn't flinch. His men rushed past him, taking defensive positions, but he stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the dark horizon beyond the shattered window. Why are they attacking? Amina whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising wind. Jinsu didn't look at her. Because they think fear will make me bend. And will it? She asked. He finally turned, meeting her gaze. No. Another tremor rippled through the house. Amina's breath hitched. She'd lived through storms, power outages, street fights, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt so targeted, so personal. Jinsu stepped toward her. You need to go back to your room. I'm not hiding. she said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. You're injured. I'm not helpless. His jaw tightened. I didn't say you were. Amina swallowed hard. Then don't treat me like I am. For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension between them felt like a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. Then Jin-soo exhaled slowly, as if conceding something he didn't want to admit. Fine, he said, but stay close. He motioned for her to follow. She limped after him, each step sending a jolt up her leg. The hallway was filled with guards, their faces grim, their weapons drawn. Amina felt their eyes on her, curious, suspicious, protective. She didn't know which. They reached a reinforced door at the end of the hall. Jin-soo pressed his palm to a scanner, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a control room filled with screens displaying camera feeds of the property. Amina's breath caught. The outer gate was in flames. Smoke curled into the night sky. Drones buzzed overhead like mechanical insects, their red lights blinking ominously. Black tie, one guard muttered. They're testing our defenses. They're provoking us, Jin-soo corrected. They want a reaction. Amina stared at the screens, her heart pounding. Why me? She whispered. Why would they come after me? Jin-soo didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer to the monitors, his expression unreadable. Because you were with Drex, he finally said, and Drex worked for them. Amina's stomach dropped. I didn't know. They don't care what you knew, Jin-soo said. They care what you might say. But I don't know anything. That doesn't matter. Amina felt the room closing in. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. This is insane. I'm nobody. Jin-soo turned to her, his voice softer. You're not nobody. She shook her head. You don't even know me. I know enough. Another explosion echoed outside, closer this time. The screens flickered. A guard cursed under his breath. They're breaching the perimeter, he said. Jin-soo's eyes hardened. Prepare the countermeasures. The guards moved instantly, flipping switches, activating defenses. Amina watched in stunned silence as automated turrets rose from the ground outside, firing precise bursts at the incoming drones. Sparks lit up the night sky. This is a war, she whispered. It's always been a war, Jin-soo said. You just didn't see it before. Amina's hands trembled. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be part of this world. She didn't want to be hunted, used, or protected like some fragile thing. She wanted her life back. But her life was gone the moment Drex cornered her on that bridge. A sudden alarm blared, sharp and urgent. One of the screens zoomed in on a figure approaching the burning gate. A man in a dark coat, walking with deliberate calm through the smoke. Amina's breath caught. Who is that? Jin-soo's expression darkened. A message. The man stopped in front of the camera, lifted his head, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that promised pain. He held up a small device. Get down, Jin-soo shouted. A blinding flash filled the screen. The room shook violently. Amina fell to her knees, covering her head as debris rained from the ceiling. The lights flickered, then steadied. When she looked up, Jin-soo was already on his feet, fury burning in his eyes. They want war, he said. They'll get it. Amina pushed herself upright, wincing. What does that mean? It means you need to stay alive, he said, and I need to make sure of it. She stared at him, fear and confusion swirling inside her. Why do you care so much? Jin-soo hesitated, just for a moment. Then he stepped closer, his voice low. Because I failed once, he said. I won't fail again. Amina didn't understand, but she felt the weight of his words, the pain behind them, the promise. Before she could respond, a guard rushed in. Sir, they're regrouping. We need orders. Jin-soo straightened. Hold the line. No one gets through. The guard nodded and ran out. Jin-soo turned back to Amina. You need to stay in the safe room. No, she said, surprising herself again. I'm not hiding while people fight because of me. This isn't your fight. It is now. Jin-soo stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Respect, frustration, fear. He didn't show fear often, but she saw it now. and the tightness of his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. "You're injured," he said. "I can still stand." "You're scared." "So are you." He didn't deny it. Another explosion shook the house. Amina grabbed his arm to steady herself. His muscles tensed under her touch, but he didn't pull away. "Please," she whispered. "Don't leave me alone." Jin-soo exhaled slowly. "I won't." For a moment, the chaos outside faded. The alarms, the explosions, the smoke. It all blurred into the background. There was only the two of them, standing in the dim glow of the control room, bound by fear and something neither of them could name. Then the lights flickered again. A guard shouted from the hallway. "They've breached the lower level." Jin-soo's eyes snapped toward the door. Amina's heart dropped. The danger wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the house. The guard's shout echoed down the hallway like a warning shot. Amina's breath caught in her throat. "Breached." Inside, the word rattled through her bones. Jin-soo moved instantly, his hand brushing her arm as if to anchor her. "Stay behind me," he said. Amina nodded, though fear clawed at her chest. She limped after him as he stepped into the hallway, his men forming a protective formation around him. The lights flickered again, plunging the corridor into momentary darkness before buzzing back to life. "Lower-level entry compromised," a guard reported, voice tight. "We're sealing off the east wing." "Do it," Jin-soo said, "and reroute all remaining units to the central hall." Amina's heart pounded. She didn't know what any of that meant, but she knew enough to understand one thing. The danger was no longer distant. It was here, inside these walls, inside the place she'd been told was safe. A sudden crash echoed from below, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Amina flinched. Jin-soo's hand shot out, steadying her. "They're trying to flush us out," he said. "Why?" she whispered. "Because they think fear makes people stupid." "And does it?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Not you." Amina swallowed hard. She didn't feel brave. She felt like she was unraveling. But Jin-soo's voice grounded her, even as chaos erupted around them. Another guard sprinted toward them. "Sir, they've breached the storage hall. We're losing ground." Jin-soo's jaw tightened. "Fall back to the inner corridor. Protect the girl." Amina stiffened. "Don't call me that." The guard blinked, startled. Jin-soo's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Protect Amina," he corrected. The guard nodded and motioned for her to follow. But Amina didn't move. "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You're not," Jin-soo replied. "You're staying alive. That's how you help." "I can fight." "Not with that ankle." Amina clenched her fists. "I'm not hiding." "You're not hiding," he said softly. "You're surviving." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. She hated how much she needed it. Hated how much she needed him. A loud metallic clang echoed from the stairwell. The guards raised their weapons. Amina's pulse spiked. "Move," Jin-soo ordered. The guards ushered her down the hall. Amina limped as fast as she could, glancing back at Jin-soo. He stood firm, eyes locked on the stairwell door as it shuddered under repeated blows. "Jin-soo," she called. He didn't look back. "Go." The guards pushed her around the corner just as the stairwell door burst open. Amina heard shouting, the thud of bodies colliding, the sharp crack of impact. She twisted, trying to see, but one of the guards blocked her view. "Keep moving," he said. "No." Amina shoved past him, ignoring the pain in her ankle. She reached the corner and peeked around it. Jin-soo was fighting 3 men at once. He moved like a storm, silent, precise, devastating. One attacker lunged. Jin-soo sidestepped and struck him in the throat. Another swung a metal pipe. Jin-soo caught it midair and twisted, sending the man crashing into the wall. The third tried to grab him from behind, but Jin-soo slammed him to the ground with brutal efficiency. Amina stared, breathless. She'd never seen anything like it. He wasn't just trained. He was relentless, controlled, deadly. But then she saw it. A fourth man emerging from the stairwell, raising a weapon. "Jin-soo," she screamed. He turned just in time. The attacker swung the weapon toward him. Jin-soo blocked it, but the impact sent him stumbling. The man lunged again. Amina didn't think. She grabbed the nearest object, a decorative vase on a side table, and hurled it with all her strength. It shattered against the attacker's shoulder. He spun toward her, eyes narrowing. Amina froze. Jinsu didn't. He surged forward, grabbing the man and slamming him into the wall so hard the plaster cracked. The attacker crumpled to the floor. Jinsu turned to Amina, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. He was going to. You could have been killed. So could you." Their voices collided in the narrow hallway, raw and sharp. Amina's hands trembled. Jinsu stepped closer, anger and fear warring in his eyes. "Don't ever do that again," he said. "I'm not going to stand there and watch you die." "I wasn't going to die. You don't know that." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Amina," she shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "I'm not useless. I never said you were. You treat me like I'm fragile. You're injured. I'm still here." He stared at her, something softening in his expression. "Yes," he said quietly, "you are." For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The chaos faded. The alarms dimmed. There was only the sound of their breathing and the unspoken truth hanging between them. Then a guard rushed in. "Sir, we've secured the lower level, but we found something." Jinsu straightened. "What?" The guard hesitated. "A message." Jinsu's eyes darkened. "Show me." The guard handed him a small device. Amina recognized it instantly. The same kind the man at the gate had held. Jinsu pressed a button. A distorted voice filled the hallway. "You can't protect her forever." Amina's blood ran cold. The message ended. Silence followed. Jinsu closed his hand around the device, his knuckles turning white. "They know about you," he said. Amina's breath trembled. "What does that mean?" "It means they won't stop." Her heart pounded. "What do we do?" Jinsu looked at her, his voice steady. "We fight back." Amina swallowed. "How?" He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Together." Amina felt something shift inside her. Fear, resolve, something deeper she didn't want to name. But before she could speak, another alarm blared, this one sharper, more urgent. A guard shouted from down the hall. "Sir, they've triggered the backup generators." Jinsu's eyes widened. "That means..." The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the house. Amina gasped, and somewhere in the shadows, a voice whispered, "Found you." Darkness swallowed the hallway so completely that Amina couldn't see her own hands. Her breath hitched, sharp and panicked. She reached out blindly, fingers brushing the wall. Somewhere ahead, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, confident. "Jinsu," she whispered. No answer. Her heart pounded so loudly, she thought whoever was in the dark with her could hear it. She took a shaky step backward, her injured ankle screaming in protest. She bit down on a cry. A faint click echoed behind her. Amina spun, but she saw nothing, only the suffocating black. "Don't move." Jinsu's voice whispered suddenly, close enough to make her gasp. She felt his hand brush her arm, steadying her. Relief flooded her chest so fast it made her dizzy. "Where are they?" she whispered. "Close," he murmured. "Stay quiet." Amina nodded, though she wasn't sure he could see her. She felt him shift, positioning himself between her and the sound of approaching footsteps. A voice drifted through the dark, low and mocking. "You can't hide her forever, Park." Amina froze. Jinsu's voice was ice. "You shouldn't have come here." "You left us no choice," the intruder said. The girl saw too much. She saw nothing. Jinsu snapped. She saw enough. Amina's pulse spiked. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself small. The darkness felt alive, pressing in on her from all sides. The intruder's footsteps grew louder. "Hand her over and we walk away." "No," Jinsu said. Amina heard the shift in his tone, calm, controlled, deadly. "Then you die tonight," the intruder said. Amina felt Jinsu move. A sudden impact shook the floor. A grunt, a crash, the sound of bodies colliding in the dark. Amina's breath caught. She couldn't see anything, only hear the violence unfolding inches away. Jinsu, she cried. Stay back, he shouted. Amina stumbled, her ankle buckling. She hit the floor hard, pain shooting up her leg. She bit her lip to keep from screaming. A hand grabbed her wrist. She gasped, trying to yank away. Got you, a voice hissed. Amina's heart stopped. She kicked wildly, her foot connecting with something solid. The man cursed, tightening his grip. Let go, she cried. He dragged her across the floor. Amina clawed at the ground, nails scraping against the smooth surface. Panic surged through her chest. Jinsu, she screamed. The man yanked her harder. He can't save you. Amina's fingers brushed something, a fallen flashlight. She grabbed it, twisting her body, and swung it blindly. It connected with the man's jaw. He grunted, loosening his grip. Amina scrambled backward, gasping for breath. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. The man lunged for her again, but Jinsu was already there. He slammed the attacker against the wall with a force that made the entire hallway shake. The man collapsed, unconscious. Amina stared, chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. Jinsu turned to her, eyes wide with fear he didn't bother to hide. Are you hurt? She shook her head, though her ankle throbbed violently. I'm fine. You're not fine, he said, kneeling beside her. His hands hovered over her shoulders, unsure whether to touch her. He grabbed you. I hit him, she whispered, breathless, with the flashlight. Jinsu blinked, stunned. Then something like pride flickered in his eyes. Good. Amina let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. Jinsu reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. You're safe, he said softly. For now, she whispered. He didn't deny it. Guards rushed into the hallway, weapons raised. Jinsu stood, pulling Amina up with him, supporting her weight. Secure the house, he ordered. No one gets in or out. The guards nodded and scattered. Amina leaned against him, exhausted. Why won't they stop? Because they think you're leverage, he said. They think hurting you will break me. Amina looked up at him. Will it? Jinsu met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Her breath caught. He looked away, jaw tightening. That's why you need to leave. Amina's heart dropped. Leave. It's the only way to keep you alive. She shook her head. I'm not running. You have to. No, she said, voice trembling. I'm not leaving you. Jinsu closed his eyes, as if her words physically hurt him. Amina, you said we fight together, she whispered. I'm holding you to that. He opened his eyes, and she saw it. The fear, the anger, the longing he tried so hard to hide. You don't understand what staying means, he said. Then explain it. It means you'll be hunted, he said. It means you'll be a target. It means you'll never have a normal life again. Amina swallowed hard. I didn't have one before. Jinsu exhaled shakily. Amina, she stepped closer, ignoring the pain in her ankle. I'm not afraid. You should be. I'm not, she whispered. Not with you. Jinsu stared at her, his expression breaking for the first time. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're going to get yourself killed, he murmured. Then you'll have to keep me alive, she said. A small, broken laugh escaped him. You're impossible, and you're stubborn. He shook his head, but he didn't pull away. If you stay, everything changes. I know. You can't go back. I don't want to. Jinsu's breath trembled. Then stay close to me. Amina nodded. Always. He leaned his forehead against hers, just for a moment, just long enough for her to feel the truth in his breath, the weight of everything he wasn't saying. Then he pulled back, eyes burning with resolve. This isn't over, he said. Black tide will come again. Let them, Amina whispered. We'll be ready. Jinsu looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see a victim. He saw a partner, a fighter, someone who refused to break. He took her hand. Then we fight, he said. Together, they walked down the ruined hallway, past the fallen attackers, past the shattered walls, past the fear that once held her captive. Amina didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her old life was gone. Her new one had just begun. And as the narrator's voice rose over the final scene, the screen dimmed to black. If you want to see what happens when Amina and Jinsu take the fight to the Black Tide, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Their war is only beginning.